My name is Habiba, and today I'm going to tell you about my experience going to residency. So I graduated medical school in 2000 and went on to internal medicine residency in New York City. And hopefully today I'll be sharing some inspiration, some wisdom, and basically things that you will need or tools you'll need, and important lessons that I learned as a resident. So let's go. This is your first job, your first paying job. And lesson number one is the hospital is always open. And what I mean by that is the hospital is always open. Okay, so when I went to New York City, this was basically my first week as an intern. And I remember being excited that I was back in New York. I was close to my mom. I had my first child, and so it was going to be nice to be with family. And the first holiday when I started as an intern was 4th of July. And I remember all the celebrations that were going on in the city, and so I just assumed I was going to be off. I was going to be off for the day and, go hang out with my family or go do something fun. No, not so. I was scheduled to work. I just remember the shock of like, what? 4th of July is a federal holiday. Why am I in the hospital? Because the hospital is always open. So as a resident or intern, after medical school, do not assume you will have holidays off, because more than likely you will work most of those holidays. You will be lucky if you get a holiday off. I also remember working at Sloan Memorial Kettering, and I'll get into that later. And I remember being on for Thanksgiving Eve. It was the day before Thanksgiving. And usually after you're on call for a day, the following day, somebody comes to relieve you, you sign out with them, and you go home. But I remember this particular Thanksgiving weekend, I basically was there for the day before Thanksgiving, and I go to find out who's coming on call to relieve me, and come to find out there was nobody scheduled. It was going to be me. I was going to be in the hospital yet again, and I was so upset because I really wanted to go home to eat. I was looking forward to all the Thanksgiving, big dinner, but no. So again, do not assume in residency that you will have holidays off like most people who work a 9 to 5 or have, regular jobs. This is not a regular job. You are training and working at the same time. In residency, your first year, you are an intern. And there is the stereotype that, residents and interns are overworked. Well, that is not a stereotype. That is real. That is real life. You will be overworked. If you thought medical school was hard, residency will be even harder regardless of what specialty you go into. I mean, I don't know if there are any easy residencies out there, but pretty much your internship year probably is going to suck. And you're just going to have to get used to that. Hopefully you have supportive family or supportive spouse or supportive girlfriend, boyfriend, or just, supportive friends and family in general. But it's going to be some of the hardest. You are usually chronically exhausted. And when you have time off, you are looking not only just to relax or sleep. Most of the time, I think we were looking for some sort of escape. You feel like you're cooped up, crammed into that hospital hours on end, that you're constantly looking for a high, a way to escape. So make sure that you have healthy ways lined up or things planned when you're off, so that you don't, fall into disruptive behavior like alcohol abuse or drugs or things like that. But just know it's going to be some of the hardest times you have ever. Lesson number 3. Get used to foreigners. When you go to residency, and when I say foreigners, I mean people from all over the world. For most US-based residency programs, you're going to meet people from all over the world. So if you don't like foreigners, I'm sorry, you're going to have to get used to it. because some of your residents are from China, from India, and some of them are straight from Canada. And they are some of the smartest people, because it's really hard as an international student, or if you have a J1 visa, it's really hard to get into residency. But if you do, chances are you're pretty smart. So they take some of the best students from the top of their classes to come to these U.S. residencies, which is why you'll find a lot of foreign doctors in the United States. And I'm sure it's probably like that in the United Kingdom or Canada. But yeah, I remember meeting people, after medical school. I'd gone to medical school in the South. So majority of my peers were Americans, Southern Americans, which was different for me too, because I always thought of myself as a Northerner. But when you went to residency, it was just totally different, especially this was residency in New York. So a lot of my peers were Chinese, again from India, Canadians, etc., Russians. I had never really had a lot of Russians as colleagues before. So this was definitely a new experience. And, I love people from all over the world. So this was great for me. I had no problems with that at all. I love diversity. So anyway, just be prepared. Lesson number 4. You get to residency, and I don't know about you, but for me, it really hits you that you are going to be responsible for other people's lives. This is not a joke anymore. Not that it should have been, but this is real. This is serious. You are put responsible, or you are being made responsible for other people's lives. So make sure whatever choices you make, that you are doing it in the best interest of the patient and not your ego and not what's easy. And, just make sure that your choices are honorable when you're dealing with other people's lives. Of course, you're going to have residents there to help you. You're going to have attendings there to help you, and you're never really alone. But sometimes it does feel overwhelming to know, oh my God, I hope I put in the right order. Oh my God, I hope I checked her labs on time. Is she going to be okay? Is that patient going to live overnight? It's a lot. In medical school, and you realize that there was just a ton of information you had to learn. Well, it doesn't finish. It doesn't end. In residency, you're going to learn even more information. And again, it can be overwhelming, learning about ventilators, learning about how to read echoes, or how to interpret stress tests, things like that. But just realize that now that you're in residency, obviously you're here because you have a broad amount of knowledge that you have already mastered. And so, it's easy to fall into the sense of doubt, but to step back and realize, okay, I am here because I clearly am capable of learning this information and of taking care of people. And I know for myself personally, I always felt a sense of imposter syndrome, it's called. Imposter syndrome, where you feel like, do you really belong here? How did I get here? I remember times where I was shocked that I was in residency, because I always thought of myself as a bit of an artist more than a scientist. And I always thought that, oh my God, they're going to find out I'm not that smart. They're going to realize I may not belong here. It was just this constant sort of self-doubt. And a lot of times, though, it made me more conscious of what I was doing. And I was always incredibly careful about my choices, because I never wanted to mess up. I didn't want to mess up. I always wanted to do the right thing. So just know, though, that, not everybody walks around feeling super smart. Back to that imposter syndrome that I told you I used to feel. There were times where, honestly, the work just felt so overwhelming. The amount of time that you spend in the hospital, feeling exhausted and feeling like, am I ever going to know all of this information that I need? There were times where, honestly, I almost wished I would get kicked out. I almost hoped I would get kicked out, because I wasn't the type of person to quit. I was not going to quit, leave on my own. And you spend all these years in school wishing for this thing, and now you get it, and you think, oh my God, I don't think I can do this. This is just too much. And so I remember being called by the medical director or the resident director and feeling like, oh my God, this is it. I'm about to get kicked out. And not in a way that, I was afraid or disappointed. I was, looking forward to getting kicked out. And I know that does not sound like the right thing to say, but just so that you understand the level of work and stress that we were going through. But anyway, on one occasion, it really was the complete opposite. And never during my training was I asked to leave. So that never actually happened. But that was what was going on in my head, that I had so much self-doubt that I thought, okay, this is what's going to happen. So it never happened. But I remember one time marching to the director's office thinking, this is it, I'm gonna get kicked out today. And it was the complete opposite. The director told me, at this point I was a resident. This is my second year, and he told me that there was an intern who was kind of slacking off and was lazy and was going to sleep when he should be up. And he wanted to put me in charge of this student. He wanted me to keep an eye on this student because he knew that I was responsible. So I remember thinking like, okay, I guess it's not happening today. You're still going to be here. So, it was a blessing. It's definitely a blessing that regardless of what was going on in my head, this was not what people saw. They actually thought I was a very responsible. Assigned different hospitals. Sometimes it may not be just your hospital. You may have to go and work in different places. And for us in New York City, one of the places that was an option was to go to Sloan Memorial Kettering, which was a cancer center. It's a world-renowned cancer center where a lot of patients from all over the world go as a last resort. So very, very sick people, very, very sick people. And many times when I went, because I say many times because usually most students or residents went there maybe once, maybe twice. It was one of those kind of luck of the draw. They would tell us it was a luck of the draw. You would get assigned there. And after going there the first time, I kind of swore to myself I didn't want to go back there. I really didn't want to go back there because I dreaded seeing people so sick. And it wasn't even just the amount of work. It's a lot of work, but it was the fact that I still was a very sensitive, overly emotional person who felt things, felt more than I probably should have. I hadn't really properly learned how to distance myself. And that takes time. Sometimes, you see people who are suffering and you feel helpless. And I'm the type of person at that point that would start crying. I couldn't help it. So it was always very heavy, a very heavy place to be. And so I always felt like I don't want to go there. And each time, the option of an elective or rotation came up, somehow I managed to land at Memorial Sloan Kettering. So anyway, my first impression going there was that it was a huge place, very fancy. You walk in and I remember the oriental rugs. I remember the silk flowers and the huge vases. The elevators were gold, or they looked gold. Everything was pristine. It was clean. It was shiny. It looked like a 5-star hotel. It did not look like a hospital. But the biggest thing that happens is that after a while, you stop seeing all that materialistic, things. You stop seeing the stuff and you're focused on the sick people. And what I realized over time is that none of that stuff was really relevant or really important to the patients that were in those rooms. I would go into exam rooms where people were dying of liver cancer and they were at their last breath. And I would think, God, do they care about those elevators? Do they care about their fancy room? Do they care about all this fancy stuff? No, they don't. All they care about is, please, doctor, make me well. Can I have one more week? Can I have one more year maybe? Can I have one more day to live? That's all they cared about. And so I really learned to prioritize my time and also how I see things. That all that stuff that we spend our life acquiring, it's meaningless if you're not healthy. You could be the wealthiest person, and if the medicine available can't save you, it means nothing. It absolutely means nothing. So I think that what that experience at Sloan taught me was that everyone's pretty much equal underneath it all. I try not to be overly enamored or taken by people who are well off. You know how sometimes people worship celebrities or look up to people because of all the stuff they have. Oh, look at the big house they live in. Look at the nice car. I swear to God, half the time that means nothing to me. Means nothing. Sure, in real life, I want nice things, but in the end, it's not that important. More than anything else, I want to be healthy. Because if you're not healthy, you can't do and have all those things. And what happens when you're really sick is you're not focused on anything else but your health. I want to feel better. I just want to feel better. I just want to see my granddaughter graduate. I just want to see my son get married. Those are your priorities. And I would say this would be number 7, is that death can be so close. Yeah, death can be so close. One day you might see a patient that looks really well, and the next day they can crash. So you really have to be on top of it. There is no time to slack off. Make sure you are being attentive. Make sure you are being very conscientious about, another person's life. Check their labs. Make sure you are signing out appropriately. Make sure you check, everything that you're supposed to. Review their medications. Make sure you understand their history. All that basic stuff that you learned in medical school is even more important in residency. And for me, another reminder of how death is so close was my experience and the thousands of New Yorkers that experienced 9/11. So during residency, I was a second year. I was a second year when 9/11 happened, the bombings in the tower. And it had to be the scariest day of my life. I'm sure it was the scariest day for anyone who was there. But just to, give you some understanding, our residency program was literally blocks away from the World Trade Center. So my mom worked at the World Trade Center, and my son, my first child, was actually at a daycare at the World Trade Center. And so when that day happened, the residents we were rounding. I remember it was in the morning. We were rounding. We were walking with our attending, and I remember my pager going off. And then I kind of looked up because everybody's pager was going off. And, we all looked at each other like, what? This is strange, because usually it's one intern or one resident at a time, not or everybody's pager going off at the same time. So we looked at our pagers, and it said there had been an accident, right? There had been an accident, and we were to expect to discharge a number of patients. We needed to discharge most of our patients if possible, because there were going to be a number of patients coming in. So we were the closest hospital to the World Trade Center. We weren't the largest, but we were the closest hospital to the World Trade Center. So I just remember the chaos, the fear and the chaos. everybody was running in different directions, and not immediately. It was, this was a high-rise building, so you could look outside and you could see the madness and sheer hell that was going on. You could see the smoke, you could see people running across the bridges, people were running everywhere, people were screaming. In the hospital, they try to keep things calm, and so residents were assigned different floors. It was as if the world was just coming to an end, and our attending looked at you, and the attending looked at me, and he said, for example, this floor, you're going to be in charge of this floor. So everybody was assigned different places to go. People ran to the ER. People were just going left and right. It was just sheer hell and fear. I've never felt fear like that in my life, and I hope I will never feel fear like that again. I remember the first thing, though, that went through my head once I had a moment to process what was going on, once we realized it wasn't an accident, that this was an actual act of terrorism, what went through my mind was, should I go home? I needed to go home because at the time, my son actually had not gone to daycare at the World Trade Center. He was home with a nanny, and I had two children. I had two babies, and so we had a nanny to stay over because one of them wasn't feeling well. So she was next door to the hospital, and my husband was at work, but I knew that he was at work somewhere farther away, somewhere in Midtown. He wasn't close. But I was also worried about my mother because I pretty much really at that point believed she was dead. We knew that there had been a ton of fatalities, and the phones were down because everybody was calling their loved ones. I could not reach my mom. She worked there. And I just remember I was praying. I was like, please God, let her not be dead. Please God. I remember just going through this turmoil of, should I go home? My job is here at the hospital. I can't go home because I've been assigned to the hospital. This is my job. But yet I'm thinking as a mom, I need to go check on my kids. Oh my God, I need to find out whether my mom is alive. What is going on? It was just all these thoughts that were going through my head. And I remember walking quickly through the stairwell thinking, praying, please God, please, no, please let my mom not be dead. I just, oh my God, it was the worst feeling. All right, I will just fast forward. You know what, I can't even watch. You know how they have those every year now, they have those memorials and those stories about the World Trade Center on the television every year. I really can't watch them because I just get so emotional, so upset. It just brings back all these memories. You feel violated. You feel violated. I don't even know how else to explain it. The smoke, the smell of burning bodies outside, it was just the dust, the thick, it was awful. And I don't wish that on anybody anywhere in the world. And it's sad because I know that this happens in other countries too, but it is totally I don't even know how to explain it. But fast forward, we find out, luckily, that my mother actually was late. For once in her life, she was late to catch a cab. And so she never made it to work because as she was getting to work, the bombing happened and the cars, a lot of them had to turn back. So apparently my brother had made her late. My brother lived with her and he had insisted that she eat breakfast, and so she was late and she never made it to work. Unfortunately, she lost a lot of people in the building and a lot of her co-workers. Some of them were never found. There were obviously, as you know, tons of people that died, perished that day. So yeah, it is definitely a day I will never forget because, well, obviously you know why I would never forget. But yeah, and you know what's interesting is that one thing you will also learn in residency which you may have had in medical school, but more so now because you are right in front. You are there taking care of patients, is that there is a lot of fear. And when I mean fear, I mean the fear that you feel, the anxiety that you will feel, and it's okay. It's not a sign of weakness. There were many times that I felt fear, the fear of being called on in front of the group. You're rounding in these large groups. You come in front of a patient and the attending asks you what you think about X, Y, and Z. You know, learning to read the ventilator, learning to read EKGs properly, learning to interpret lab tests properly, or making sure that, yes, that you are giving the correct diagnosis. There's so many times where you feel uncomfortable, but you kind of work through the fear and you do it. And then you surprise yourself that despite the fear, you were able to get that lumbar puncture. Despite the fear, you know, you did not let that patient crash. Despite the fear, you managed to run. You know, you're always worrying about whether you did the right thing, you know, whether that patient is going to crash overnight or not. Whether that patient that came in or that you admitted with a cough, hopefully they don't have tuberculosis. Did I catch something? Did I expose myself to something? I'm about to get some blood. Did I stick myself? I hope I don't stick myself. This patient has HIV. What would happen? What would happen to me? Or, you know, there's just so many things that go through your head, and the amount of adrenaline that you're constantly dealing with that you will learn to get used to. Number 9, learn to focus on the best patient care. If you always keep that in mind, it helps you to keep you out of trouble. Focusing on best patient care. Not necessarily always doing what is convenient for you, but doing what's in the best interest of the patient. Making sure even simple things like signing out with your co-residents. You know, sometimes you would see residents who were in a hurry. They just want to get out of here, so they don't want to sit there and tell you about the patient they're about to sign out with. Make sure that you make it a priority to sign out properly and to make sure that you get a good sign out yourself. Make sure you know this patient you're going to inherit. You're not going to know everything, but make sure that the pertinent things that you're supposed to look for overnight or while you're on call is something you are comfortable with or aware of. Make sure that that patient has advanced directives, or that you asked about advanced directives, so that you're not surprised later on. So again, I think what really kept me out of trouble in general is that I've always been focused on what is best for the patient, even at times when the patients want to sabotage themselves, or when the patients aren't necessarily, you know, doing the right thing. You have to be the one in charge, or the one that is always, you know, trying to do what's morally correct. Residency, or lesson number 10, that you may not have learned in medical school, is that not all patients in the hospital, patients, are really sick. And what I mean by that is that you will find many times that patients are often what we call dumped into the hospital. They will come in through the emergency room because, number one, maybe that poor old lady doesn't have a very supportive family, and they just want to dump her in the emergency room, or have her admitted because they want to go away for the weekend, or they just don't want to deal with her, you know, because they're going on vacation. So they find an excuse, or they make up a story, or they purposely, you know, avoid giving her her medications or whatever treatment she's getting at home, and bring her in. And I know that sounds so heartless and so cold and so unreal, but people do it every day, and it's so sad. It's so sad when, as a resident or as a doctor, you realize that you can't believe how many people will actually dump their loved ones in the hospital who aren't really sick. Then there's another group of people who might be your homeless people, or maybe they're not homeless and they're alcoholics or drug addicts, and they just want a place to crash for the weekend. And so they will pretend to come in because they want to have a detox, or they pretend to come in because they want to get off alcohol or drugs. But really, they're just looking for a place to stay. So sometimes you're going to learn that you're going to recognize the real patients from those that are just there because of social issues. And unfortunately, you may not have a choice. You have to take care of them. You have to admit them. You were called to admit them. And you liked this video, and if you did, please don't forget to give me a thumbs up. And if possible, if you could share it below, there's a button below where it says share. So yeah, why don't you share this with a colleague or a student that you may know that might want to know a little bit more about residency, or my best Superwoman voice, you know, Superwoman from here on YouTube. If you like it, subscribe. If you like it, subscribe. If you like it, subscribe. Well, in my case, I would say if you liked it, please comment and please share.